Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /entitled people, where people truly believe that the world revolves around them and no one else matters. And in today's episode, we're dealing with entitled Karens in airports and on planes, guys. Because what's worse than entitled Karens adding extra stress to an already stressful travel day, right? Get ready to shake your heads because this one is wild. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your posts to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so to start, I'm a frequent flyer, and I've seen my fair share of entitled blow-ups in airports and on planes. If there's one true thing I've learned about traveling, it's do not annoy airport staff. They're the people who decide if you get to board or not, and being aggressive, rude, or confrontational to them will get you nowhere. That said, when this happened, I was at Sydney Airport, traveling to see family in New Zealand, going through bag check. In front of me, I could see an angry, red-faced businessman who seemed to be stressed and in a hurry. The security person, an Asian woman in her 40s, was checking his luggage, and the businessman immediately became irate. The guy starts yelling at her saying, "Why the hell are you looking at that? Get a bloody move on. Do you know how many people have places to be right now, and you're just checking the dumbest crap ever?" The security person tells him, "Sir, your luggage was selected for a hand check, so you need to be patient." At that, he responds, "I have an international flight leaving in 10 minutes. Don't you tell me patient. Effing hurry up. I'm so sick of airports always hiring these incompetent idiots." At this point, a second security person comes, and they tell him, "Sir, you need to calm down. We're just doing our jobs." But instead of calming down, Mr. Businessman predictably became angrier and more belligerent towards the staff. And of course, he starts dropping slurs. The guy basically screams and says, "I'll have you know, I travel through this airport frequently, and it gets worse every single time because of you Fs. You keep hiring these useless, insert Asian slur, and I'm sick of their incompetence. Learn to speak effing English. Half the damn time, I can't even understand what they're saying. And I have a flight leaving in 10 minutes. I don't have time for this. Just give me my bag and let me leave. Why is that so effing hard?" Hearing him lose his lid, security now looks extremely fed up with this guy. But clearly, they weren't done with him yet. I noticed that the staff member did her bag check slightly slower than normal. All the while, the man proceeds to throw more of a tantrum and acted like a spoiled child. At long last, the guy snatches his luggage away and began to stomp off, only to be stopped for a body search. Immediately, the guy blows his top again. When I left to walk to my gate, he was still raging, and at this point, I think supervisors were approaching him. I very much doubt he made his flight. So the moral of the story is while traveling is stressful, it always helps to be patient with staff doing their jobs. Otherwise, you might not make your flight. I'm still baffled about why he was causing so much trouble when he had so little time to make his flight. I'll tell you why. It's because people like him think that screaming at staff members gets them to magically move faster. Like, do people like him not understand that it's really hard to want to help rude people? And what's that saying? Poor planning on your part doesn't necessitate an emergency on mine. Like, why would you cut it so darn close for an international flight and expect everyone to cater to you, sir? And OP's right though, like the chances of him making the flight are frickin' slim, especially after throwing out racial slurs at staff and causing that big of a scene. And guys, if you think that was satisfying, this person shares their comment and they say, "I was flying solo in my early 20s at a small airport in Europe, waiting to pass through security in the very early morning. Because of the time, the line for security wasn't too long, maybe 20 people or so waiting. I was only traveling with a large backpack and there was only one agent serving the whole line. There was a couple behind me with a big rolling suitcase, which they were pushing in front of them. As the line crawled forward, I take a few steps forward to close the gap, and the woman pushing her suitcase just rams it hard into the back of my legs. At first, I didn't react because accidents do happen, and I wasn't injured or anything. But then, it happens again and again and again. Every time the line moved forward and I followed, I would immediately get rammed by her suitcase. And here's the thing, I wasn't slowing them down or in their way, I was literally just ahead of them in line. I chose to walk the path of peace and tried my best to dodge them ramming me, at times just staring at them while they did it. They saw me reacting, and they just kept doing it. Now, I didn't speak the language they did, but they were basically muttering and grumbling to each other. I'm assuming they were complaining about the wait, but hurting a random stranger won't speed things up. My best guess is they were trying to bait me into conflict, who knows. A few times they hit me, I looked up at the airport agent and I made eye contact. I could tell they saw what was happening between me and these a-holes. Also, not one person in line had been pulled aside for extra screening. It was finally my turn to go through security. I walked through no problem, and then I got the sweet satisfaction of watching these a-holes behind me get stopped, and then directed into the extra full search room. In my heart, I felt like the airport agent was getting back at them for me. That is pretty satisfying what happened, but you know what else would have been super satisfying? It's if OP turned around after the third or fourth time and just booted that suitcase as far as they could. Like, I know OP wanted to avoid conflict, but that's one way of dealing with rude, entitled a-holes like that. Especially when they knew that OP knew and they were still doing it. Like, what in the world? So I work for a major airline in the US as a flight attendant, and this happened about 2 years ago. We were working a flight from Orange County to Denver, which is normally less than a 2-hour flight, which is important for later. I was the one in the front of the aircraft greeting passengers as they came aboard. The very first people to come on the plane for this particular flight was a family. 2 teens, their father, and their mother in a foot cast. They sit in the second row, and the rest of the boarding goes totally normal. We even got the door shut an extra 5 minutes early, and we were all thinking about going down to the hotel bar at the end of a wonderfully uneventful day. As we pull away from the gate and start taxiing to the runway, I start making some of the normal announcements. You know, the one that no one actually pays attention to. When I say that the Wi-Fi isn't working. Honestly, it does suck when that happens, but there's literally nothing I can do about it. Immediately, once I say that, the mom then rings her flight attendant call button, and that's when I look towards her and I can see the frantic look in her eyes. That makes me realize that my peaceful day is coming to an abrupt end. So I ask her what's going on, and she begins telling me how she can't possibly be on a flight without Wi-Fi, how she has nothing to watch, and how she can't handle being on this plane. Hearing her say that, I look at her dumbfounded. Like, this is a woman in her early 40s, sitting next to her 2 children and husband, and she's freaking out about not having Wi-Fi for a 2-hour flight. But of course, I don't point any of this out. Instead, I put my best customer service smile on, and I apologize for the inconvenience. The woman then starts crying and saying she has to get off the plane right now. So I ask her if she's totally sure she wants to get off because we're still on the ground and it's possible to go back, but it is a pain in the butt to return to the gate. As her sobs continue, I realize that at this point, even if she wanted to stay, there is no way that I would feel comfortable with her at 40,000 feet. So I have another crew member call the pilots and explain what's going on. I let her know that we're going back and that she and her family can deplane. And this is the point where her wonderful husband decides to get involved. And you would think that he would be consoling his wife, but he thought a better idea was to tell her to shut up and to start yelling at me. So the guy starts screaming at his wife, saying she was going to be fine and we don't need to go back. And then he screams at me how I was the one being dramatic and wasting everyone's time. After a very awkward taxi back to the gate, I go to the front so we can reopen the doors. All the while, the husband's alternating between cussing at me and yelling at his wife. Once we finally got the doors open, I head back to their row, and I ask them to deplane and offer to help them with their belongings. And this is when the wife looks up at me and she smiles, and this is the part I'll never forget. The woman says to me, "So I'm just gonna run up there and download a movie, I'll be right back." I just smile at her and I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Of course, that wasn't happening. We get them off the plane and into a slightly confused hands of a ground supervisor. We then quickly reclose the doors and I exchange shocked glances with my crew. Who really thinks that they're gonna get back onto a plane after you made them and 130 other passengers turn around because you couldn't spend 2 hours with your family without Wi-Fi? Yeah, I hope that Karen and her family were put on the no-fly list because having a plane turned around for that silly reason, I feel is quite severe. Especially after she pulls the, "Oh, now that we're back at the gate, let me just go download a movie real quick." Like the audacity of some people, right? That said though, they were taxiing to the runway, which means they were still on the ground. Like she could have used her mobile data to download a movie, right? And if not, does she not know that you can go 2 hours without watching something on a flight? Like, maybe try interacting with your family, lady. And guys, if you think that was ridiculous, oh boy, this next post will leave you shaking your heads. So I want to share a story from my time working at the airport. My personal favorite is back when I was the supervisor for a vendor company that supplied employees to different airlines for services. In this situation, I was providing the wheelchair and other assistive services to those traveling with a disability. This was about 2 to 3 years ago, so the details are kinda fuzzy. On this day, I was supervising the smallest section. Small in that I only had 4 agents to oversee. One of my staff had just left for his 30-minute lunch break, and I was making my rounds, making sure things were okay at different gates. I then get a call over the radio that a passenger at the ticket counter needs assistance. I call several agents to see if they're available to assist. One of them responds back and says he's coming back from dropping off a previous passenger and he'll be there momentarily. Not even 5 minutes later, I get a call stating that the passenger at the counter is demanding a supervisor because she's been waiting 30 minutes. So I check my call log as our radios record times and messages for situations like this. And I see that my very first notification wasn't even 5 minutes ago. And I thought to myself, yay, it's gonna be one of those customers. So I make my way down to the ticket counter, which was another 5 minutes, and I meet the customer in question. It's an older lady, a Karen. I walk up and say, "Good evening, my name is so-and-so. I was told someone needs a supervisor." The ticket agent says, "Yes, this lady right here, she needs a wheelchair." Karen then says, "Yes, I've been waiting 30 minutes and my flight's getting ready to leave. I need to be there right now. This is unacceptable." I respond, "I understand, ma'am. I've notified my agents and I have an individual on the way. He's dropping off another passenger, but he should be here shortly." Karen says, "No. I need to be at my gate right now. I can't wait another minute. I'm gonna miss my flight." At this point I say, "Well, I could take you through security and tell my agent to meet us at the other side of security instead of here. Would that be okay?" Karen says, yes, that's fine." As we go through, I ask for her boarding pass to scan it to indicate I've picked her up, which also enables me to see all sorts of information, including if she's a pre-check for TSA, and she wasn't. So I take her to the TSA agent to have him check her boarding pass and ID, and then enter the regular line. I also want to note that her status was also irrelevant due to this terminal having certain hours where they have a pre-check, and they shut it down for the other time periods when it's slow. At that, Karen says, "Why are we going here? I'm TSA pre-check." I respond, "Well, I don't see it on your boarding pass, but they currently have it closed right now." Karen then says, "Well, why are we waiting behind all these people? I'm in a wheelchair, so I get to cut the line. I need to go to the front. Is this your first time on the job?" I tell her, no, it's not, and unfortunately, that's not how it works. I can't do that, ma'am. We're able to go through an expedited line, but once we reach this point, we need to wait in line behind everyone else. Karen screams at me and says, "You don't understand. I'm gonna miss my flight." I then ask her for her boarding pass at this point, and I look at it and say, "Oh, you still have about 15 minutes before they start boarding, and then another additional 30 minutes before they close boarding. It's just right around the corner from here, so we have plenty of time too." She then stops me and says, "No, you don't understand. I have to be the first one on the plane. I'm in a wheelchair." When I still insisted that I couldn't take her to the front, what she did next shocked me. The woman then stands up from the chair, and with no problem at all, she marches to the front, past 20 people, without the need of any assistance. Powerfully stomping, mind you, so her legs were fully functional. She then starts yelling at the TSA agent that she's in a wheelchair and she needs to come to the front of the line. The TSA agent then said if she wants to cut in front of everyone, she needs to ask them. And spoiler alert, Karen doesn't ask, she demands, which no one's willing to give up their spot for her. Fast forward a bit, and I get the luggage and chair to the front, and Karen tries to go through the metal detector. The TSA agent asks for a boarding pass, so she shows both that and the ID. After this, Karen then turns to me and she yells at me. The woman wants my name, threatening to report me for being no help at all. But the story's not over yet, folks. I then went to the ticket counter, got the name of the agent who called, who confirmed she wasn't waiting 30 minutes, got a copy of the lady's boarding pass, got the name of the TSA agent, and then wrote a report at the office, detailing them as witnesses and stapling her non-TSA pre-check boarding pass to the paperwork. It's been a few years, so I forget the term, but the person who's making sure we're in compliance with the ADA and the ACAA calls me about a month later and tells me he's gotten a complaint about me. He saw my paperwork, but he wants to hear it from my mouth because, quote, "It's so crazy the stuff she said about you that I know she's lying. The woman literally wanted you gone. I want to hear this story." In the end, I did not get into any trouble for that. Entitled Karens, I tell you. And seriously, I hope that woman wasn't wanting a wheelchair for the sole purpose of skipping through long lines at the airport. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case because there are people out there that do that. And the fact that Karen got up out of her wheelchair, marched past everyone, and then started screaming that since she's in a wheelchair she gets to cut, like if I were in that line, I would be totally baffled. So I have a son who's currently 2.5 years old, but we've been traveling by planes since he was 6 months old, due to us living 18 hours away from my family. In the US, you don't need to buy a plane ticket for a child under 2 years old. You can buy a seat, but they can also be considered a lap child and they can sit in your lap for free. When my son was about 1.5 years old, we were flying back to my hometown to go visit my family. We were flying on an airline named Opposite of Northeast. On this airline, an adult with a child under 6 years old gets to board first, which was helpful for me to get some extra time to find a seat and settle with my kid. Now, since he was under 2, he could have flown for free and sat in my lap. But after the flight we had taken a few months before that, where he was hell on wheels and I was mortified by how terrible we made our roommates' flights, I decided to buy him a plane ticket so we would have a little more room for our things. Diaper bags, toys to entertain him, snacks, breast milk, blanket, you name it. I hated to feel like I was inconveniencing other passengers, so it was better to give him some extra room in the form of his own seat, so as not to crowd others when he wanted to get out of my lap or try to look out the window, etc. Now, if you've never flown with a child under 2 as a lap child, you should know that when you go to check your bags at the airport, you get a normal boarding pass for yourself, as well as a boarding pass for the child that clearly says lap infant across the top of it. Otherwise, if you buy your child a ticket, they get a normal boarding pass like everyone else, with your boarding group/number. This airline has rows of 3 seats on either side of a very narrow aisle, We board with a family boarding, and I grab 2 seats all the way in the very back row, and shove all of our stuff into the seats and go about trying to settle our things in. My son decides to sit in the seat by the window, and he was watching the ground crew do their thing. I was in the middle seat beside him, and the aisle seat was empty, and that's when the plane starts to fill up. But again, we were at the very last row, so most people found a seat before they made it to us. And most people saw I had a kid with me, and they decided to sit elsewhere. Can't blame them. When the plane was about 75% full, I hear someone say, excuse me, in a rather snobby voice. I then turn to see a woman maybe 40s with a girl who's maybe 7 to 8 years old. Now, before I could even respond, the entitled mom demands I move to the aisle seat and take my son with me so her and her daughter could sit by the window. I want to say that if my son was flying free and was a lap infant, I wouldn't have had any issue moving to the aisle seat to let the girl sit by the window, if the mom asked nicely. However, I had purchased 2 tickets with my own money, which isn't easy to swing when you're a single mom. And even if I moved to the aisle seat, my son would have the middle seat and she'd have to sit apart from her daughter. I wasn't going to be used as a babysitter for someone else's kid on a flight, even if I didn't have my own child to deal with. I tried to explain this to her, and it went something like this. I say to Karen, oh, I would, but I bought 2 seats. And even if I move, there would only be 1 seat open, so you might want to try somewhere else so you both can sit together. That's when Karen says to me, you're lying. He's clearly not even 2 yet, and under 2, they fly free, and they sit in your lap. I know, so move, now. I respond, yes, they can fly for free in your lap, but I specifically bought my son his own ticket, so he could have his own seat and more room. Karen responds, well, he's small, so just hold him. My daughter wants to sit by the window, and I need to be in the last row, so hold him so we can sit here. I respond, I'm really sorry, but no, we need the extra space, and I bought and paid for the extra seat. I'm not gonna give it up just because you feel entitled to the space. Our things are settled and stowed away. At this point, Karen's working herself into a tizzy, and she's caught the attention of the older couple sitting across the aisle. The husband tries to tell this Karen to choose somewhere else to sit, but she snaps at him to mind his own business. So when she turned her attention back at me, the wife waves down one of the flight attendants who came over. And it went along these lines. The flight attendant comes and says, hello, are we all okay over here? Karen says, no. This woman refuses to put her son in her lap to make room for us, even though he's clearly less than 2 and can fit in her lap. The flight attendant then turns to me and she asked, ma'am, is your child a lap infant? I start to respond and I say, well, he is less than 2 years old, and that's when Karen butts in and she says, see, I told you, so make her move. I then go on to say, but I did purchase him a ticket because I knew he would appreciate having some extra space to get out of my lap. I then grab both of our normal paying customer boarding passes and hand them to the flight attendant, and I say, see? Karen says, that doesn't prove anything. They give boarding passes for lap infants. The flight attendant turns back to Karen and says, yes, they do give boarding passes for lap infants, but this is not a lap infant boarding pass. So I'm sorry, but she paid for that seat, and there's no assigned seating, so you can't ask her to move. Karen then starts going crazy. She's screaming at me, at the flight attendant, and at her kid, who's crying. Anyways, the flight attendant ends up threatening to have her removed from the plane by air marshals if she didn't find a different seat. Karen huffs angrily, and she promised to write a terrible review. And she also told the flight attendant specifically that she was gonna call the corporate office to have her fired for treating her and her daughter so poorly. The flight attendant rolled her eyes, where only I and the older couple could see, and then she apologized. The rest of the flight went smoothly. I saw Karen inside the airport afterwards as we make our way to the baggage, and she was berating a cleaning staff member because the airport Burger King was closed at 11:30 p.m. as if the poor staff member even had control over that to begin with. I pointed a TSA person towards them and went on my merry way. This was about a year ago, and I haven't thought about it really, until one of my coworkers said something that reminded me of it, so I decided to share. The frickin' entitlement in this one, guys. I don't care if you paid for 2 seats, you will take up one because I said so. I'm actually surprised Karen got to be on that flight. Like, the instant she threatened the flight attendant, she should have been kicked off and been told, go ahead, go make that report right now. But yeah, good thing OP purchased 2 seats because it would not be fun sitting next to her. And I do wonder how the person who had to sit next to her felt. I bet she wouldn't shut up about it the whole time. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in our / malicious compliance episode, where bad bosses are getting absolutely destroyed. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.